Hello, everyone. In our previous lessons, we learned that major disaster events can cause strong psychological stress for those who experience or witness them. If psychological crisis interventions are not provided in a timely and scientific manner, it may lead to mental health disorders and affect both physical and psychological well-being. So, what is psychological crisis intervention? How is psychological crisis intervention implemented? In this lesson, we will explore the concept, purpose, principles, target groups, and forms of psychological crisis intervention, along with the essential qualities and characteristics of psychological intervention workers. First, let's learn the concept of psychological crisis intervention. Psychological crisis intervention involves taking clear and effective measures to help individuals in a state of psychological crisis, enabling them to ultimately overcome the crisis and readjust to life. Second, the purpose of psychological crisis intervention. Generally speaking, psychological crisis intervention has three levels of goals. The minimum goal, to alleviate the individual's psychological pressure and prevent extreme behaviors such as suicide, self-harm, or aggressive behaviors. The core of this goal is prevention. The intermediate goal, to help the individual restore their previous social adaptability, enabling them to face their challenges and take positive and constructive actions. The core of this goal is recovery. The highest goal, to help the individual transform the crisis into an opportunity for personal growth and improve their problem-solving abilities. The core of this goal is development. Third, the principles of psychological crisis intervention. 1. Principle of targeted intervention. This principle emphasizes focusing on the current issue and immediately taking targeted intervention measures. Individuals in psychological crisis often hide their pain and feel emotionally down or distressed. As an intervener, you must guide them to accept help promptly and identify the issues that need intervention. Once the issues are identified, a reasonable psychological intervention plan should be provided quickly. 2. Principle of support. Individuals in crisis need more support than usual. It's essential to ensure that the individual feels supported at any time and that necessary support, whether from family, employer, or the community, is available when needed. 3. Principle of action. The goal is to help the individual take active steps to address the crisis. The crisis intervener must actively offer support, provide constructive suggestions, and clarify what action should be taken at the moment of crisis and how to adopt suitable, effective coping behaviors. 4. Principle of normalcy. Psychological crisis intervention uses simple psychological techniques to help individuals analyze the nature of the event and their role in it. It also points out the irrationality of their current goals, lifestyle, and beliefs, as well as the faulty self-defense mechanisms they may have adopted when faced with the event. In other words, the intervener should treat a psychological crisis as a psychological issue rather than a mental illness. 5. Principle of completeness. Once psychological crisis intervention begins, measures should be taken to ensure that the intervention is carried out completely to avoid further trauma. 6. Principle of confidentiality. The personal privacy of the individual must be strictly protected, and their personal information should not be disclosed to third parties without consent. 4th, the target groups and forms of psychological crisis intervention. 1. Target groups of psychological crisis intervention include primary victims who have personally experienced the disaster at the scene, secondary victims who have family members suffering injury or death in the disaster, and tertiary victims involved in rescue and medical efforts, including doctors, nurses, mental health professionals, firefighters, police officers, and volunteers. 2. Basic forms of psychological crisis intervention encompass face-to-face assistance, telephone support, individual counseling, and group counseling. 5th, the essential qualities and characteristics of psychological intervention workers. The process of psychological crisis intervention is complex and varies with different situations. Those engaged in psychological crisis intervention must possess professional qualities and characteristics. Psychological crisis intervention workers need to have professional competencies, including basic knowledge, specialized skills, and crisis training experience, which are essential professional requirements. Basic knowledge refers to theoretical knowledge related to psychology. Specialized skills cover psychological diagnosis, psychological testing, and the practical skills of psychological counseling and therapy. Crisis intervention training enables psychological intervention workers to help individuals in crisis resolve problems more professionally and effectively. In addition to the above professional competencies, psychological intervention workers should also possess the following qualities and characteristics: a passion for psychological crisis intervention and a spirit of challenge, respect for and compassion toward those receiving intervention, with a strong sense of service, high standards of occupational ethics and a spirit of dedication, the ability to work in teams and foster collaboration, a commitment to the principle of benefiting the individual receiving intervention, respect for privacy and an emphasis on confidentiality. Alright, in this lesson, we covered the concept, purpose, principles, target groups, and forms of psychological crisis intervention, as well as the essential qualities and characteristics of psychological intervention workers. How exactly should the intervention be carried out? We will continue this discussion in our next lecture.